successful with a career in photography. So let's get started right away. This is the overview of what I'm doing. So in my research, I started with an essential question to help guide me in this project. Then I just kind of nailed down the basics of photography. Just asked what is it really, and I'll get into all this later. The basics, the process, the equipment, creativity involved, and then the investments that need to be made into photography as a career, the education, cost of equipment, advertising and networking that can be done, and then how you can profit from photography by selling and licensing images, working for hire, and signing contracts, and working for salaries or hourly rates. Then I'm going to get into a few examples of successful photographers' photos, and then I'm going to conclude the presentation. So, I thank Brian Gerke, my mentor. He's right there. And yes, he really helped me just kind of solidify what I needed to do for this project. He is a photographer himself, mostly just focusing on just doing it as a hobby, also helping the community with photography. And yeah, he helped me just kind of nail down what I was going to focus on for this presentation. And I decided to focus a lot on interviewing local photographers who do it themselves and just doing research. And yeah, also just taking photos myself. Unfortunately, I didn't include that a lot into this presentation, but that was part of my research and everything. So, here's the introduction. Yes, I started with the essential question, and that is simply, can photography be an economically viable career? And if so, how can it? What is photography? So this is a dictionary definition of photography. It is the art or process of producing images by the action of radiating energy and especially light on a sensitive surface such as film or an optical sensor in the case of a digital camera, and is used for a variety of purposes, including artistic expression, just for fun, journalism, advertising, and even scientific research. Basics. Okay, so this is just several steps of the process of photography that I broke it down into. So first, the image needs to be captured in the field of whatever subject you're taking the photo of. So it's captured with a camera, obviously, using, on a film camera, the light comes through the lens, through the aperture ring, and onto the film or the sensor. Right here you can see there's a mirror that reflects the light up into a prism and out to the viewfinder, so you can look through the camera and see what you're taking a photo of. And yes, so on a film camera, after you take a photo, you need to process it in a dark room. You can do this yourself. Now people who use film cameras often send them away to a place to process it. Mostly people use digital cameras now, and so usually they just take all their photos, they organize them in some kind of software, and they can also edit it in that same software, and then sort of just putting the photo out there. Some people just keep it for safekeeping, store prints that they made, store the film, or you can publish it online, or you can keep it on a hard drive if it's a digital file. Right. The equipment needed. So, camera. There are many different kinds of cameras. Obviously, film cameras used to be used solely when they were first invented. Now most people opt for digital cameras. There are many beginner point-and-shoot cameras that you can buy for quite cheap just to get started. Also, modern phones, just iPhones, have decent cameras on that you can use. Many professional photographers choose to get quite more complicated photographers cameras purchase much more complicated cameras that they can adjust the settings on and get their desired effect and photo that they want. Many beginner cameras come with lenses just built on. You can't exchange those. Some have multiple that you can switch to, such as the new iPhones. But a lot of professional cameras have different kinds of lenses that work differently with light and with aperture and with the length, that allow different areas to be exposed and captured in different landscapes. Some have a wider view, so you can capture wide landscapes. Some you can focus on more close-up things. They have different uses. Many photographers just use natural light for taking all their photographs, but also for certain applications it can be helpful to use artificial lighting, such as a lot of cameras come in with built-in flashes, but you can also purchase other lighting that can light the subject, especially for studio photography, such as taking photos of people. And there's also other equipment that can be used. There's lots of equipment. Obviously you need batteries, charging cords to keep the camera up and running. It's a film camera. You need extra film. You need memory cards to store digital files, and there are many other accessories that you can also purchase. There's a tripod to help keep the camera steady. Yeah. Also storage to keep all the expensive gear safe. Okay, so obviously photography is an art form, and everyone takes a different approach to it. It requires a good degree of creativity, of personal creativity, to get a good result. You can't just point and shoot if you want a good camera, a good photo. Yes, so there's a lot of creativity involved in just choosing the subject. You don't just go out there taking photos of random things. Often people travel the world looking for just a specific subject they have in mind, and they make a whole portfolio out of that. Some people just walk through the woods and take photos of whatever catches their eye, which is a good thing. That's something that I do a lot. Yeah, and once you have the subject, you need to compose a good image. You need to make sure often the subject is centered. Sometimes that's not the desired effect. Sometimes people like to focus on different subjects and how they interact with each other. And yeah, there's a lot of creativity involved in there. Yeah, lighting is a big part of photography, since photography is based on solely light, pretty much. That's what's captured in the camera. That's what develops film, or that's what is captured in the sensor. And yeah, this picture right here is an example of what's called light painting. Is when a camera is exposed, the film or sensor is exposed for a long time, and so it allows moving light to be captured as it moves, while the still object just remains still and is captured as a still image. So I have experimented with this before, and it's pretty fun, and it can come up with some cool results. Okay, so to be good, have a career in photography, you need to invest in some things. Let's start with education. You don't need. Okay, so this is what I have here. It says the best way to improve photography skills is to practice capturing lots and lots of photos. Many photographers also choose to pursue a conventional education in photography, for example. So, yeah, there are photography degrees that people take in it sometimes, especially if they're looking to work for a company that makes them more marketable to work for them. Many photographers, however, choose not to do this. They just choose to learn on their own, or with mentors, or with friends. And compared to a lot of other careers, this is a good way to learn, just taking photos. Okay, let's get into the cost of equipment. So you can get a simple camera for under $100, but and you might take amazing photos of that, but that's not the desired, but it might not be the desired quality of that many people look for. So a good entry level, but still with many features, camera can cost from around $500 to $1,000, and professional grade cameras that many professional photographers use can cost like upwards of $5,000 or even much more, which is a lot of money. But if you do that a lot, then it might be worth the investment. Camera lenses for professional cameras also cost quite a bit. On those DSLR cameras, they can cost anywhere from $200 to over $1,000. Yes, lighting equipment can vary greatly. You can get simple flashes, some are built in with the camera, around $100, and many more complicated lighting costs a lot of money. Yes, and then editing software, which many photographers used also for organizing their photos. You can get free softwares, but also more common ones cost around several $100s a year on a subscription plan. Right, and then advertising and networking. You need to get your art out there if you want to sell it to people. Also, if you just want to share it with the world. So most photographers have a website that they just list some of their photos, their galleries, and to display their contact information or sell photos directly from there. Social media is a tool in this day that many photographers use to promote their work, and it is free and a good option for many. Also, photographers can purchase online advertising space or physical advertising space, such as signs. It's not that common, but to advertise their work and drive traffic to their website or whatever else they are using to sell their photos. And photographers also physically network and attend many conferences or workshops with other photographers or people who are interested in hiring photographers to get their work out there. Okay, we're going to get into truly profiting from photography, which is part of my essential question, is that, can you do this? So yes, one way you can do this is by just selling and licensing your images that you've taken and now own. You can sell photos directly from your website, such as in the form of digital files. You can also in physical storefronts or anywhere physical place you can sell prints, or you can sell prints online. You can also license images to stock photo agencies or to pretty much any company or individual who wishes to use the photo for any type of use. There are different kinds of licensing. Some you might just license it for private use, or you can license it for commercial use, and usually it depends how much you charge for each of those. And also, many photographers work for hire. So, for example, wedding photographers, it's a very common career among photographers. When people are married, they want to have photos of that moment because it's very special to them, and they need it to be well captured. So they hire professional photographers for this, and to be hired, you have to have a portfolio that is going to attract customers and make them want to hire you for this because they want good photos. Yes, wedding photographers and any kind of event photographers usually charge like just a flat fee for an event, depending on the length of the event, or they charge by the hour. And it depends on a lot of factors. Yes, and some photographers choose to kind of go more like conventional working approach, just working for like an individual or company by the hour or by contract or as for a salary. For example, some companies might need a photographer for their business, just taking photos of what's going on so they can show what's happening in that business. Also, there are many magazines who need photos for their magazines, such as National Geographic. They contract private photographers for individual stories, so that involves researching, going there, interviewing people, taking lots of photos, and presenting a portfolio and an article to the magazine. And National Geographic, according to Paul Nicklin, who is a prominent National Geographic photographer, usually pay around $400 to $500 a day for people in the field. That might seem like quite a bit if you do that a lot, and yes, professional photographers do that a lot, but you still have to account traveling, and sometimes you might not have a story to cover, and so it can be kind of risky even if you're signing a contract that they'll pay you a specific amount. This is the thing about photography, it's not always that reliable source of income. So yes, it can be a reliable source of income since you can make quite a bit of money off of it, but there is a certain amount of risk involved since you are usually the one selling your work yourself and you're not just working for someone. But many people choose to work for someone because this is a more reliable way of getting income. Alright, so we're going to get into a few examples of successful photos for photographers. Okay, this is a famous photo taken by Steve McCurry, National Geographic photographer, and it was featured on the cover of the June 1985 National Geographic magazine. Subject is a young refugee in Afghanistan then, and this is an example of a photo that really created an emotional response and really opened people's eyes to something that was going on in the world. And just, you can see in the photo, it just, to many people, including me, it just generates this intense feeling of like, you can tell she's like haunted, and it kind of, if you read the article, then it really opens your eyes to just what was going on with refugees at the time. Okay, this is small business in Vermont, run by Eric Johnson. He's one of the photographers that I reached out to, and he was kind enough to allow me to interview him, and he was very helpful with his responses. On his website, he states that he offers professional photography, editing, video services, real estate, aerial drone photography, videography, family and senior portraits, corporate photos, restaurants, and retail photography. So this is a wide variety of services that he offers. Many photographers choose to offer a wide variety of services since there's more opportunities for them to make a profit off of their work, and they're also many of them are very practiced in a wide variety of skills, including Eric Johnson. He was talking about how it takes a very special kind of person to be successful with photography. He has seen people who have gone to school for photography and spent a lot of money into that, put a lot of money into investing in equipment, and they still just don't have the eye for taking a good photo. So it takes a certain individual to succeed in this. I know for him, this is his primary source of income, but this is not the only source of income. So he has another job that he uses to pay his bills, which is what many photographers do. As if you run your own business, then it's risky whether or not you get money. Another example is dwelling photography, run by Jen Cypress. And she has really identified a niche. She went to school for photography in New York City, and she takes photos of real estate. So if real estate people are looking to sell their house or their home or land, then they hire her to take professional, good-looking photos so that they can market their real estate. And she has made this her full-time job in business, and this is really an example of how she's doing very well with this. And if you really choose a niche, you can also choose to do many different things, but if you choose a niche, then you can also be very successful. Alright, so let's wind down. So, my essential question, let's recall, was can photography be an economically viable career? And if so, how can it? So, my answer that I found through my research was yes, it certainly can. There are a lot of risks involved, and it requires a lot of commitment and taking up risks, as I just said. And you might not always be successful, but if you truly commit to it and market yourself well, then you can certainly make a living off of this, as I showed in previous examples. Yeah. One thing about selling your services or images is that you choose how much you sell it for, right? You choose how much you charge, or you choose how much you sell your images for. Good. Price one of your photos at $10,000, and probably no one would buy it, but maybe someone would see the beauty in that photo and would be well off enough to buy that. So you can do really well with that. But also you can charge them, set the prices really low, and then everyone would buy them. Then you might not make a profit because you're not charging enough. So that's an interesting thing that I found throughout the research. Right. Thank you very much. These are my works cited, including images and research resources and the interviews that people that I interviewed. Any questions?
Yes, I wonder about you and your specialty. What draws you particularly in photography? What type of photography, if you've gotten there yet in your life?
Yeah, I have purchased a kind of beginner level used digital camera, right, that I just mostly use for just taking pictures of wilderness and wildlife. I just usually, and I live like in a very rural part of Vermont, as most Vermont is rural, but it's very rural. And I usually just walk around my land taking photos of whatever catches my eye, and sometimes just experiment with setting up light in interesting ways. And yeah.
Do you process your own photographs?
Yes, I use editing software called Adobe Lightroom, which is what a lot of both beginners and professionals use. And yes, I organized them there, and then I edited them digitally. I haven't got into film photography, but I would like to.
I bet it's going to be fun for you. I bet it's going to get your mind working.
Yeah.
It's already working, I can tell.
Awesome set of examples. Was there a specific like professional direction that you connected with as far as like specialty or being a generalist or doing something that sounded like exciting in the professional sense?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like if I was ever gonna pursue photography professionally, I kind of would like to keep my options open. So like I might take kind of the approach that Eric Johnson made, just kind of just offering a variety of the services. I want to, if a niche is cool, yeah. But if you're, I'm not sure I want to make it my full-time job. I decided, but certainly, yeah, I'd like to keep my doors open.
That's great. Any plans to continue studying photography or keep practicing it as a hobby and learning through workshops and stuff?
Yeah, mostly I might I'm not majoring in a bit education in photography, but I definitely plan to just keep taking photographs, and in college I might even take classes related to that, because I'm very interested in it.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it.
What was the most interesting thing you learned throughout this process?
Just things that I learned. I just
Could
think
you
it's.
repeat the question? I'm sorry, couldn't you?
Oh yeah, she asked, what's the most interesting thing I learned throughout the process of this research project. I thought it was very interesting about how I just like photography because it's an art form, but it's also very like journalistic in a way that it captures very like just accurately like the subject or an event. So you can draw, you can like in other forms of art you can paint or draw, and it's very you have a lot of freedom, but it's also it's not exactly accurate, but you also have a lot of freedom in photography, but it's also a very like one-to-one representation of your subject. But
Do you have, I know you featured the Afghan girl, but do you have like an image that has really stuck with you, that's like a favorite photograph you've seen?
I mean, that certainly is one. I remember I used to be subscribed to National Geographic, and we had a lot of old issues too. And when I saw that, I was obviously it caught my eye, right? And yeah, that's probably one of the biggest ones, to be honest. That's why I featured it. But yeah, there are certainly, I don't know if I could think of any examples, but there are certainly other photos that I've seen that are just very like vivid and like dramatically capturing like moments of like, for example, like war or like famine and like tragic events, and it really just brings that home to you.
Do you have a specialty that you love to do?
I like to keep it flexible, but I mostly just like taking pictures of nature and just walking around the land and just taking pictures of landscape, or sometimes urban landscapes, and yeah.
Simple camera or complex, are you a?
There's quite a few options. It's a digital camera. I probably should have brought it, but yeah, it's relatively simple if you really like. It might be daunting if you just take a look at it. There's a lot of buttons to press, but yeah, it's a DSLR camera, which is a digital single lens reflex. Yeah, it's just a single lens, and there's a mirror inside that reflects it into the prism and out of the viewfinder, so you see what you're taking a photo of. The mirror folds down when you press the shutter, and takes the photo.
Great. I'd love to see them.
Yeah, I
Don't think that will happen
I
today.
think Alan might have a few film cameras that don't do it.
Yeah.
Well, this is you can do it in your presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, sure, yes.
Working in the house?
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Alan Moody. I did my project also on photography, but I had a focus on film photography. A quick note is that a lot of the photos in the backgrounds of these slides, including this one, were taken by me during my time in New York City working on this project with my mentor. So first, we're going to go over a quick overview. I'll start with my essential question, just like Lenny did. I'll let you know what film photography is if you're not so sure about it. I'm going to talk about my trip to New York City. I'll show off some photos, some double exposure, and I'll explain what that is when we get to it. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of photographers who Christopher Rielander kind of inspired me to try double exposure. And then Alfred Stieglitz is someone who shares a kind of a view on photography being an art form that I think is really important. And finally, we'll have conclusion and questions if we have any. So, to get started, my essential question for this project was how can film photography enhance our understanding of photography as a form of artistic expression. I had always been interested in photography, but I hadn't had a chance to really explore it or to think about it on a professional level at all. And so that's what I got to do during this project. So, to start, what is film photography? Well, right here I have a film camera. It might not look like it might look a little bit more digital, but this is also a film camera. For the sake of this one looking like a film camera, I'm going to use it to describe a couple different parts of the film camera. So, the first and probably biggest difference between a film camera and a digital camera is that the back here pops open. That's a timer. So that if we were to load our film strip, which is right here, we load it in here, it goes across the back, and it winds, right? And here's our physical shutter, which pops open and closed each time we take a photograph. So there's no digital sensor back there like the digital cameras of today now have. Some other aspects, especially on this camera, are that the shutter speed, which is one of the two main ways you control the amount of light coming into your photograph, is controlled by moving this dial here back and forth. And those usually come in, they go from thousandths of a second to full seconds, whether you want a short exposure or a long exposure. The final setting is on the lens up here. It's really hard to see because it's quite small, but that's the aperture. It's kind of this diaphragm that opens and closes, and it does the same thing. It controls how much light is coming into your photograph. So, speaking of light, we have the light meter. If you take a look through the viewfinder on this camera, it'll look a little bit more traditional than what you might see if you were to look through a digital camera today. So the important thing to think about here is these values from 1000 to like 4 down there, I think it says, are your shutter speed values. And this green bar right here is what the camera is manually set to based on the aperture that you put and the shutter speed that you put. And so what you want to do, that's the wrong button, is you want to line up this black, what did I call it? I'm just going to call it a dial right now. It moves up and down as you move the camera around because it connects to a light meter that's built into the camera, right? And so this bar is telling us how much light is in our camera. This bar is telling us how much light our camera is set for in terms of settings, right? So what we want to do is we want to move our green bar down to match the light meter so that we can have a correctly exposed image. So that's just some of the inner workings for the camera. Finally, I was just gonna, this is already totally used up, don't worry about it. But this is just a strip of film. You see it comes out like this. This is all photosensitive paper, and that is what goes inside your camera, and it reacts to the light, and then you go through the developing process to end up with finished negatives, which you then scan in and whatnot, and that's how you end up with background images like this one, which is underexposed. So getting into my trip to New York City, this is from Staten Island. I wanted to talk about a couple of photos that I took there because I'm really proud of quite a few of them that I took. This is a good example of just finding natural framing when you're out in the wild. Not very wild on Staten Island, but this is just a kind of a shrubbery piece that I found that they definitely built it this way. It perfectly lines up with Manhattan being in the center.
Great.
So, to get into this, the first thing that I focused on with my mentor, who I'll say his name now, his name is Steve. He works at Brooklyn College he teaches photography, and he teaches it specifically film photography. So he's been doing that his whole life. He lives in New York City. He loved it there. The first day that I hung out with him and we worked together, he taught me really about the importance of being always ready to capture a photograph, right? So some important factors with that is if you always have your lens cap protecting your camera, when you go to take a photograph, there's a lot of steps that have to go through before you can be ready, right? And so if you're trying to capture, that wasn't supposed to happen, a biker that is, for example, riding by, right? You want to have your camera nice and ready. And so in this case, I knew he was coming. I didn't know the guy, but this photograph, another interesting aspect of it, other than just like capturing something as it's going by, is that you'll notice around this biker is very blurry while he stays in focus. And so this is an interesting, what's it called? It's an interesting method and kind of trick that we can use using the shutter speed on our camera. So we turn down our shutter speed to a lower shutter speed, which creates a longer exposure, right? And then if everybody could do this example with me, if you hold up your finger in front of you and then move it back and forth, focusing on your finger, you notice that your finger stays in focus but the background doesn't, right? Now that you've all taken the DUI test. So the same can be said, oops, touch that. The same can be said for this photograph. We are taking our camera and we're following the biker with our longer shutter speed, and that way the biker stays in focus while the background becomes quite blurry. So it's just an interesting type of photograph that I learned to take while I was there. Next, I have some double exposure photographs. This is kind of a simple example of what they can look like. To quickly describe this for you, the first photograph is this silhouette of these two birds standing on the wharf, I believe it's called. And so I've taken that looking out on the sky. And then the second photograph, of course, is all the birds on the side of the street being fed by a homeless man. So this is just a great example to show you how the two photos can overlap. And some important aspects there is that even in your first photo, darker portions will show up stronger in your second photo. So that's why, for example, this bird down here is much more in focus than the ones up here who are being exposed in an area that was already exposed to the sky, and so they don't show up as brightly. So another example, which is not correctly exposed because I was still learning. The thing with double exposure is that you have to counteract the fact that you're taking two photographs on the same piece of film. So whenever you're taking a photograph and you're looking at the sensor and what it's telling you for how much light, you have to either half it by using your aperture or your shutter speed so that when you take that photograph it's not overexposed. And so in this case it's slightly overexposed, but we can still see that I took a photograph of the Manhattan skyline, and then up here I've decided to put a boat that I saw in the harbor up above it, and so I think it's kind of interesting, the boat's like making its way through the clouds up above the city. Next, this photograph is of course of the 9/11 memorial in New York City, but if we look a bit closer we can see right here along these lines in a horizontal orientation there is the One World Trade Center, which is the building that was kind of built instead or in place of the Twin Towers, which were originally there. So I like this one because it shows how we can connect both like a future and a past, or just two objects that we're trying to connect, two ideas. We can connect them using double exposure because we're having two images in the place of one. So I like that one a lot. And finally, this is my favorite photograph personally that I took while I was there. This is on Staten Island in a basically abandoned mall. It was really weird. So this is a staircase that I just saw and I thought it was really interesting. It's quite dark down here, but then we have all these lights that are leading us toward a focal point of the sky up above, right? So that's my mentor Steve. I asked him to walk up and down the staircase, and I took a photograph both as he was walking up and down. And so what that ended up with is he shows up twice in the photograph, which is a cool idea to me. You'll notice that the railing also shows up twice, which is because I didn't have a tripod with me, and so just holding my camera and waiting for him to reach the top and come back down the staircase, I obviously shifted a little. So everything doesn't line up perfectly, but photographs like this I think are really interesting because you can kind of, again, tell a story, and in this case the story that's maybe being told is kind of the circular paths that people take during their city life in terms of commuting, for example. Maybe he's walking down to the subway station to go to work, but he's also walking back out because it's the same subway station that he's walked down and out of every single day for the entire time that he's lived in the city, right? So just really telling these stories through the photographs. Next, I'd like to talk about the two photographers that I mentioned earlier. The first being Christopher Relander, he's a Finnish man. He's currently taking photography not taking it, he's doing it, he does both film and digital, but he has decided to focus completely on double exposure for his photographs. And so I'd like to give a couple of his examples that really inspired me to try double exposure when I went to New York City. So, the first is a digital one. This is Neon Land, which combines the Finnish backcountry in the winter, obviously, and the neon light signs that we can find in Tokyo, Japan. So he's traveled to both those places. This is obviously digital, because if you took it with a film, if you did it with film, you'd have to travel in between with just your camera on the one photograph, and then like do it for the next one and everything. He has, however, done no editing in Lightroom or anything. This is completely just based off of what he took in the manual settings on his camera. And an interesting aspect that connects these two, very stark contrast, right? But what connects them is when he's gone out into Finland, he brought an LED light with him, and so he's shining this pink LED light onto the trees. And that way, when he takes a photograph in Japan of this colorful LED light, it kind of appears as if it is there in Finland. And so that's a technique that he's using with lighting to kind of connect the two worlds that he's bringing together. Next is Jarred and Displaced, which might not look like a double exposure photograph, but it was taken completely on a film camera. It might even be cameras exactly like this one. And it's really amazing how it works. I spent a couple weeks figuring this out. I don't want to show you the photographs that I tried to recreate it with, because they didn't turn out amazing. But, so what he's done here is he's painted the jar completely black, right? Very matte black, something that's not going to reflect any light off of it. And then he's placed a very bright light behind the jar when he's taking the photograph of the jar. And that way, that original photograph has this very dark silhouette of a jar with very bright light exposed around it, right, on his film. So that when he goes out into the countryside, this is, again, just the Finland countryside, it was all about capturing his, kind of the areas of his childhood, right, and jarring them. So when he goes out into the Finnish countryside, he's able to take the photograph of this tree. Now, of course, this landscape would continue out here, but because the first photograph that he took had such a high contrast and a bright light, the film out here has already been fully exposed, and so the landscape that he's capturing can't appear out here because that part of the film is already completely, I guess you could call it blown. Like when I pulled this out, this is completely exposed at this point. There's no point in putting it in a camera and trying to take photographs because it's already been exposed to so much light, right? So that's how he's taken such an, in my opinion, amazing photograph. Next, Alfred Stieglitz is someone who came to New York City in the 1890s, and from then on, he really pushed for documentary style photography to be considered an art form. So originally, this is something that I learned a lot about in my research, is that documentary style photography, like this one for example, of just a regular photograph of the street, right? When photography was originally beginning, photographs like this were not considered art, and there was a lot of lashback because, is that the right word? I think it is. Because, huh?
Backlash.
Yeah. Because it feels as though you're just snapping a photo, right? Like if you take your phone out and just snap a photo, then it's just there. Whereas someone who's painting something is putting so much personal work into creating, even if they're painting like a realist painting of a portrait of someone, there's so much work that's going in that it is considered a piece of art, right? And so Stieglitz was determined to prove that photography was a medium as capable of artistic expression as painting or sculpture. And so what this means is that the process that goes into creating a photograph like this, for example, he's decided to wait until this man, who's obviously walking this way, has entered the upper half of his image, and that way he has kind of this dark, watery street down here, and all of his kind of commotion is in the upper half of his image, right? That's a choice that he's made with his photograph. And again, he's deciding whether to overexpose or underexpose. There's all these aspects that he's thinking about in terms of framing and focal point, right, that go into the photograph. And so Stieglitz really pushed for photography to be like documentary style photography to be an art form, just as kind of more surrealist techniques like double exposure are also an art form, right? So here's another quick example of this, is just a photograph of these horses. We can see steam coming off of them. There's also snow in the image, so it's kind of telling this story of kind of hard work going on. But we can also see there's this man with a very funny hat that's kind of splitting the image in half. But looking a bit deeper into it as well, there's also the track here from where the horses have gone a couple times that's kind of leading our eyes up into the image. And so aspects like that, where you're leading the person who's looking at your image, you're thinking about where you want their eyes to travel as they view your piece. And so just aspects like that make documentary style photography a completely worthy art form, in my opinion, and that's what Stieglitz kind of was at the forefront of proving to people. So, finally, in conclusion, I just wanted to talk about manual camera manipulation. That's all of the aspects that I told you at the start about this: focus, shutter speed, and just loading your film, understanding all that. I had never done it before. I felt like I was all right at taking photographs on my phone, but taking photographs on a more professional, like in a manual setting level, I had never done before. And so working with my mentor Steve, who's done it for many, many years, was just an incredible experience for me. And then also, art photography, I hadn't really heard about. I knew that people took amazing photographs and like amazing portraits, but the idea of more surrealist techniques like double exposure was something that was completely brand new to me. And luckily Steve, again, being just so well versed in it, he was able to teach me a lot about that as well. And so finally, I have a special thanks to, this is my friend Gabby, who let me stay in her apartment with her parents for the 4 days that I was there in, I think it was in January. So very much thanks to them. It's a tiny place, but it's right in Manhattan, so it's perfect. It's like close to everything. And then this is a photo of Steve and his wife Deborah, who are both photographers, and that's what they do for a living. It's what they talk about every day. They live it and breathe it, and they're just truly amazing people to be around when you're trying to work on something like this. So I just wanted to thank both of them. Finally, I have my work cited here, which is just for this presentation. I had like a gazillion for my paper, but this is just a presentation. And then I have an image where we can ask questions, which is, just to quickly describe it, it's a double exposure of the arch, and then that's the Met, and then this is a very handsome man who is standing on the steps, almost posing for me, and I just happened to line up the Met sign right on his jacket, which I thought was a lot of luck and a little bit interesting. So, if anybody has any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I would, my first question would be about any surprises. Shooting film can be a fun exercise in kind of letting go of all the known entities. So were any of your double exposure surprises, or did you have any really surprising results that you can think of?
Well, some of the photographs that I showed were very, the idea that you can't view it until a couple weeks or even months after you've taken the photograph was very, very new to me. And so getting them in the mail after I'd already come back to Vermont was kind of just waiting around, right? And getting to look through all them, pretty much everything was a surprise to me. But remembering how I took them, there's a couple that I didn't get to show that were, I had one in Chinatown. It was the Chinese New Year, so I explored that. I didn't have any great photographs of it because it was dark out. But just like snapping this photograph of a guy going into his room or going into his house, and kind of, I thought for sure I caught the door closed after he'd gone in because I didn't think I'd got it in time. And so when I got my film back, it turns out I had him like perfectly silhouetted in the doorway. And so kind of the aspect of not knowing if the photograph that you took is actually good or not. But at the same time, like growing a confidence for that. So on the first day, I messed up my exposure quite a few times because I wasn't always remembering whether I was taking double exposure or regular to compensate for that. And so it was like a lot of learning went into that. Yes?
Sort of piggybacking piggybacking off that idea, we live in like such a fast-paced world, and film photography really contradicts a lot of that. So I'm wondering like if this was kind of a meditative process for you and learning experience, and you kind of answered this already, but why is it important for us to maintain film photography?
So when I was there, Steve's a very fast-paced person. He's always on the go. I'm not gonna lie, I walked 15 miles one of the days that I was there with him throughout the city, right? So there was always a lot going on, and there was always a plan for where we were going next. But you're totally right in that doing it with a film camera was very, very meditative, and also the entire plan for this project in terms of flying to New York City, finding someone to stay with, and all of that was like this kind of this stress ball of figuring it out so that I could have it for this senior project, right? But once I got there, it was really just about like exploring and trying to capture what I was exploring, and so it was like a really meditative process. And I think if I had been on a digital camera, I probably would have gone home each night and looked through the photos I was at and like kind of adjusted what I was thinking every day. And so kind of seeing all your work come through at the end versus during the process allows you to focus more on the process. And so that was really useful for me. Yeah.
Did you know when you started the project that you wanted to focus on the double exposure, or was that something you kind of learned along the way, and that once you got to New York is when you started practicing?
Okay, so I knew before I went to New York, but when I originally started, I just knew that I wanted to try film photography. It had been something I'd been interested in. I had a camera and I'd taken like one reel of film the last time I was in New York City, so I had an idea of how it made me feel when I was there, right? Taking photographs with a film camera. And so in the process of kind of searching for something to add to that, I came across double exposure and Christopher Relander and his pieces, and became really inspired to try it.
And go ahead.
Just raise your hand. Would you like to go, Gina?
Yeah, I had one observation. You know, I've used film cameras for years, and now with digital, you can take it, but then you can adjust it. You can do all this fancy stuff with it. And then with this, you don't have, unless you're doing your own. Did you do any of your own developing?
I did not. I dropped it all off on the last day I was in New York City because my mentor was like, you must take it to a very fancy lab, because if you take it to CBS, it won't be good enough.
Yeah.
And he was like very, very strict
That's
about
good.
that. So I dropped it off at a nice place, and they sent me my images. And I actually have my film at home, and next week I'm planning to go to a darkroom and use the enlargers and stuff. I don't know if you've heard about those, to make some really authentic, larger prints instead of, for example, printing the digitals that they sent me.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a different experience, and how did you translate from going from doing, because you did a lot of digital photography?
I had really only taken photographs like on my phone. I don't have a digital camera. I only have film cameras now, which is kind of funny. So
if you want one, I've got one
it was
now.
a very new
I've used
experience.
it about 20 years. So it was it's a very different experience than to go from one to the other, and get some.
It was all new for me, and so I really haven't gotten a chance to use a digital camera yet, so I can't really speak on it. Did you have?
such a silly question, but
All
if
questions?
you just took a camera and took one picture, could you arrange your camera so that you could back up and take another picture over it and then have a double exposure? Is that how you?
Let's see. So originally, the way that I was taught from my mentor, right, is that you cock your camera, you take your photograph, and then on the bottom of this one, for example, there's a little film release button down here. You probably can't see it from here, but you press that in, and you cock the camera again, and what that does is it stops the film from moving, and so that way your shutter's ready to go again, but your film hasn't moved, and so you can take your two photos right on that same piece.
Oh,
The problem with that is you have to take them, the two that are going to be on the same piece together, and so what you're thinking of is, for example, like when Christopher Relander takes photographs in Finland, thank you, and then goes all the way to Japan, he wouldn't want to do that, right?
oh.
And so for the most part, people have done that on digital cameras now, and I think a lot of digital cameras allow you to have like an SD card in it, and you can go back and take another photograph over your original one rather than having to go into Photoshop, although I'm sure he probably just combined them on Photoshop. So the idea that you can wind your film back is a great idea. The problem with it is that each photo is very, here I can give an example if we go all the way back through. It's very important that your photos line up, right? And so, oh, I took it out, never mind. I had this photograph where the two, I'm not sure why, it was just a little bit of a malfunction mechanically. The two photographs that I took didn't line up, oh my god, didn't line up. And so, when they don't line up, you have to crop in and you end up with a smaller photograph. And so, if you were to rewind, then you'd end up back at the start again. And you can't really tell what photo you're on, and so it's hard to know what you're exposing over. You might just end up with like a long chain of randomly placed photographs on your film.
I don't think I'll do that, too. Wishful thinking.
Yes.
I had a question, Alan. What I still call as a traditional camera.
Yeah.
Did you choose to work with this in this particular, and how did you get to the program in New York?
In New York. I decided to go with film because it had just been an interest of mine for a couple of years. I flew to New York. I paid for my plane ticket, or maybe my mom did. I'm pretty sure I paid for it. So I flew there. I figured out someone to stay with, and my mentor Steve, he's someone who's always worked with film photography, and so it just made a lot of sense to do it there with him. And also, for me, I'm someone who kind of comes alive in a city. I'm going to college in a city because of it. It's an environment that feels so much more alive and creative to me. And so when I'm there, I feel a lot more ready to like create something like this versus in the countryside here. I have a lot more trouble with like landscape photography. Is what I was talking about.
How did you find the New York program to be?
So Steve is my dad's cousin.
Yeah. Oh.
So he's like related to us in a very distant way.
Okay.
And so I've known him for quite a while, and I've known what he's into, and so I was able to connect with him.
Do you want to keep trying the double exposure?
So like
Or
I
is there some
said,
other technique you want to try?
with jarred and displaced, I did keep trying it, but I would really like to get into cinematography now with a digital camera and taking video, because that's something that I've kind of come across. Like movies have been really interesting to me now, so that's somewhere that I'd like to move from this and kind of taking my experience with framing and everything to go there.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I recycle your jars now?
Yes.
But the other question I have is, film photography is really expensive,
Yes.
and it always was sort of pricey, or could be. How do you feel about it, knowing that it's expensive to do versus digital, photography?
I bet a lot of people feel this way, but I think that it's very authentic. I think, like I said with his question, is when you're out there creating and you don't know exactly what photograph is coming back, because you can't see them right away, you're there to create. You're not there to like take the photo, oh, it's not quite good enough, take another one, right? You just take it and you believe in it. Pretty much every location that I took a photograph at, I only took that one photo there, and I was just hoping it was going to work out. And so I think it's a much more authentic form of photography, so I would like to continue it, but like you said, it's like $20 to $30 per roll, and that's including both buying the roll and going through the developing process.
And the plane ticket?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of what you've learned about professionals, people who are more interested in art are using more traditional.
I don't know at this point if it's still like people who are there's a lot of people who are really into the creation process, and
Yeah.
like I said with Stieglitz, about this idea that you're spending so much time creating something. And so people like to use film cameras, like I said, because it's a more authentic form of that creation.